I don't know about you, but listening, we're all incredibly time poor. There are not enough hours in the day, and I love AI. I think AI is an amazing tool to make my life easier, to make me better at doing what I'm doing. But a lot of people are really scared about AI. They're scared to have a go. There's a lot of mystery around it. And as normal, the NHS is slow to the table. Welcome to Why Medics Matter. My name's Simon Fraser, and I had the pleasure of being joined by Yasmeen Hyatt, who is a trainee who is mastering her specialty of anesthesia, but is also spending a huge amount of time mastering AI. Thank you, Yasmeen.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
Tell me a little bit about your journey and where you're at in your career at the moment.
Yeah, so I am an anaesthetics CT4 trainee. I am currently working in Yorkshire and Humber, and last year I took an OOP year where I've always had an interest in AI, but I didn't have the opportunity to really look into it. Whereas my OOP year gave me that opportunity to do an AI clinical fellowship at the Improvement Academy. And I enjoyed it so much that I've continued on with that. So I've now split my work between clinical and the AI work at the Improvement Academy.
Fantastic. And enjoying that?
I'm loving it.
Wow. So in terms of learning about AI, I want to be provocative. Will AI replace doctors?
So that is very often how it's phrased. And I think there is a bit of a paradigm predominantly driven by AI vendors to almost replace clinicians. So if you look at a lot of the research in the AI healthcare space, it's always talking about how we can compare AI tools to how doctors perform. And I think fundamentally, that's actually the wrong perspective to look at it with.
Okay.
You know, these AI systems are not there to replace us. Much like when we replaced coffee in World War II, as we ran out of stocks, it was typically called ersatz coffee. And I think of AI systems that are designed to replace doctors as ersatz clinicians. So, yeah, I think fundamentally that's the wrong way to look at it. And how we really need to look at it is from a systems-based perspective to see how AI can work with doctors to create a system that performs what each individual in that system can do.
Fantastic. Okay. So if it's not going to replace us, actually, what is AI? We throw all these words out. What does it mean to me as a clinician?
Yeah. So AI is a term that's very often bandied about, and I think sometimes we forget what it actually means. So AI stands for artificial intelligence. And really, we have to pinpoint exactly what we mean by intelligence. The typical definition that's been given is that AI is essentially tools that can mimic human intelligence. But ultimately, when you boil it down, it just finds patterns between data sets. So that's fundamentally what we mean by artificial intelligence, is statistical tools that can find patterns in data sets.
And so how is it being used in clinical practice? Is it being used freely, safely, wisely? What's your view?
I wouldn't say it's not commonplace at the moment. It's starting to make its way in. I think we're already seeing it go into other fields a lot more quickly. And I do think this highlights perhaps a cultural difference between technologists and healthcare professionals. So as healthcare professionals, we are evidence-based practitioners. There is a 17-year gap between research and implementation. And
17?
It's 17 on average,
oh my
absolutely. And it's a culture steeped in hierarchy. So, we understandably so, because we want people who have the best experience to look after our patients. And technology is very different. It tends to be disruptive, almost a move fast and break things, if we're going to pull out that quote directly. And perhaps compared to healthcare, definitely a lack of accountability, not to be very cynical about it. So it's how can we bridge the gap between the two? And I think that's really the crux of the challenge here as to why we've not seen it implemented much. But But there is tools coming in, and most of what we've seen so far is in the administrative space.
Okay, tell me a bit more about that.
So the obvious example would be Copilot. So
Mm-hmm.
it's been shown to save a lot of time. So it can take meeting minutes. It can help with documentation, providing summaries for large documents and to pull out really key bits of information. So it's quite easy to see how it can help with efficiency gains there. But there are some tools that I think we have to be careful with that seem administrative on the surface, but actually they really aren't. They're more medical devices. And a good example of that would be ambient voice technology.
Okay, so you mentioned two words, ambient voice technology and devices. Just explain that a bit more.
Yeah, so ambient voice technology, a good example of that would be a tool like Heidi. So these are tools quite often used in GP practices. So they are coming into primary care. It listens in on consults, and then it provides a summary of what that consultation was. So the obvious benefit there is, you can focus on the patient. That's what we're trained to do. And you can, rather than sitting down and trying to put all those notes on your computer, you can actually listen to the patient and look at them. So patients tend to really enjoy that. Clinicians enjoy that. But, the main benefit is usually touted as a time-saving benefit. When you really look at the data, though, it's not as obvious as it initially appears, because you still have to read that note the AI has generated, make sure it's not made any mistakes, and it's not missed anything critical off.
I saw a quote, I don't know if it's true, but what you read there was IKEA have replaced 6,500 jobs with AI, but they did not lose the staff. They actually give them better jobs and they actually enhance. And does the ambient technology maybe take one of the most painful bits of being a clinician, the documentation, the letter writing, and actually give back some to the patients? I know it hasn't really reduced time, but do you think people are getting better consults?
I think that's the real benefit here. And, when we think about things like KPIs or, we want quantitative data, but the quantitative data doesn't really show the full picture. Actually, it's qualitative data that gives the stories and it gives the right questions to ask. So I think what you're showing me is that you're thinking about the broader picture of actually, what is it that clinicians really want? And they want to look after their patients. And the real benefit is that reduction in burnout. So burnout is not just being very busy. Sometimes it's not doing the job that you want to do. And tools like this can help with that. Absolutely.
I heard a clinician who introduced it in New Zealand quite freely. But obviously some of these tools are properly validated and secure to use. And he introduced it to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist said, I think you've just extended my career by 10 years. Because I just hate the admin and it's a bit, whereas actually I feel I've got some, whether it actually materializes, but it's changed the psyche, the view, and it's got a bit of a spring back. So ambient technology is, I suppose, the bit that everybody's started to be aware of, and there's some trusts that are really launched and some are like, what is that? What's ambient? I don't even know what it is. And there's still some trusts are still on paper. I remember in my trust, I was the director of medical education, and we introduced electronic patient records. What, for me, one of the best things. I know people listen might go, "Oh my God, EPR," but actually, we got EPR when COVID hit, so we had access to all the records and everything. And without the bringing in that technology, but going back to my role, there was a business case put in which said we would lose 10 FY1s to counterbalance the business case cost of paying for EPR system. And then 6 months down the line, somebody said, Simon, where are we going to use these 10 posts? And I was just like, oh, you really don't get this. And people are terrified, particularly in admin. I'm going to use my job, but there's so much work to do there. Should we be embraced? So let's stick with the admin side. So he's talked about how we can use, and obviously we've all got Copilot in NHS. The government have invested in Copilot, and they're building safe enterprise spaces. And then we can talk maybe about, I think what you talk about, palliatitis, all the different things that don't manage. We'll spend a bit of time now. But if we go back to admin or generative AI, somebody listening who's maybe a bit scared or hasn't really dabbled, what can they do?
So how they can use it in their practice
you mean? I've got my inbox full, I've got huge documents to read, I've got reports to write, I've just got so much to do, and it has to come out of this box for those one finger at a time typing.
So I think the most obvious benefit from it is that kind of summarization. So if you've got huge documents that you need to look through and you just want an overview, these tools, especially these large language model tools, can be fantastic at summarizing information. So when I say summarizing, I think that's the real key here, is that's different from judgment. And it's a question between attention and intelligence. So it has exceptional ability at taking huge data sets and summarizing it for you. So yeah, summarizing big documents. These, like Copilot, for example, you can listen in on your meeting. So similar to what I was talking about with ambient voice, it can transcribe meetings for you. So I had that experience when I was working on some interviews last year, where I recognized, oh my goodness, how challenging it is to transcribe interviews.
Oh my God.
45-minute interview.
You used to have to pay a typist to manually listen hours and hours.
Absolutely. And, I have to say, I'm a very fast typist, and it took me 3 hours to do a 45-minute interview. Whereas when I used Copilot, it was, I would say, about an hour, which was still painful, but you can see how much of a time saving it can give you. And because of the fact that it's intelligent, or, it's using AI, it can pick out key bits of information. So Copilot is just one example, but there's lots of tools that can help you to use AI as an assistant. So it's almost like a personal assistant that you can use.
What's your favorite one?
The one I like to use. So personally, I love using Claude. So that's the tool I really, really like, because it's great at what it does. So it is one of the best large language models out there, if not the best. And it also, it minimizes the amount of sycophancy some of these tools can have. So a lot of the tools might, I like the fact that it can.
Hey, Yasmeen, you're great.
Exactly. So it challenges me sometimes, or makes me, if I provide it with a piece of work I've done, it will find ways to challenge what I've written. And I quite like that.
So one of the key things, I'm a big user of AI, and I've learned a lot. And you and I, we've chatted about this at different times. And we talk about, it's what you ask AI, isn't it? It's how you've got to train the system to know you. I'm a bit like you. I love Claude, and Claude knows me well. I had a divorce from ChatGPT. I had to sort of migrate my personality and likes and voice style into Claude. How do you have a healthy relationship with your Claude or your Copilot? How do you understand each other? What's your top tips?
That's a good question. I just recognize what it's good at and what it tends to be less good at. So like I said, I don't like to use these tools and rely on them to perform judgment calls. And
so your judgment's yours.
The judgment's always going to be mine. And I think there is a corollary here with clinical AI. So with these ambient voice tools, there's a big talk about how they're actually just summarizing the consult. But really, what you decide to include in a consult note is a judgment call, right?
And what you're saying, how you bring that consultation to life, and what your narrative and your thoughts.
Absolutely. So when you ask, let's say, a tool like Heidi to shorten its clinical summary, it's taking out bits of information and including other bits of information. And we all know, as a medical student and as an F1, you write reams of notes. And as you become a consultant over time, you start shortening the notes, and you just include those really key tidbits of information. So really, these tools are summarizing, but they're actually performing judgment calls. And I personally don't like using it. Yeah, for that reason.
So you've got to train it. And I've trained a lot of my AI software to recognize our teaching voice and narrative and stuff. And I've included documents and copy, and it keeps learning. I think you've got to have a conversation. And I think you've got to be really clear. And I think you and I talked about this. I've been looking at the Copilot Studio. So there's some really fantastic learning videos, and they have the GCSE format, which is what is the goal, what you're trying to achieve, what is the context. So, the goal is I want a detailed summary of all of this feedback. The context is I am a medical education center manager, and I'm looking after training program. The source is giving them the source file of the data. They take the information from here, and this is my expectations. I expect this to be summarized in no more than 150 words with clear bullet points, which I can share with the team, written in a neutral, non-judgmental tone. Now that sounds like quite a waffly prompt, but what I've learned to do is build projects and have specific projects where we train it in the background with those prompts. Now I haven't got onto skills. I don't know if you've started with skills yet in Claude, where you can actually convert. So what it does, it takes all the skills and see how they're working out. You can actually now save them as skills. Have you got that far yet?
I've not used Claude for that reason yet. No,
I'm going to have to find somebody to, I think that's the next level. So I get these daily LinkedIn posts of the cutting edge. And I think what it highlights is the pace this moves. And you mentioned hierarchy earlier. Okay. Who's the best in the space? The inverse hierarchy. Yeah. My daughter's 22. She's used AI throughout her whole degree in maths as a learning partner and stuff. So how are we going to, given that it takes 17 years from research to implementation, how are we going to catch up in the NHS? They've put digital as a real pillar of the future. What's your thoughts? What are you hearing?
For me, I think that highlights the fact that we need people who can bridge the gap between those two cultures. And I think the people that can do that are not going to be the AI vendors or computer scientists, although they're very important. It's actually going to be clinicians. So the reason for that is you can build these tools, but if they're solving problems that don't exist, what is the point of the tool? It's about the problem that you have. So if you want to get a nail into a piece of wood, you want a hammer, you don't want a screwdriver. But very often what happens is that the AI vendors come with tools that are screwdrivers, and you bought this tool now, which was an expensive tool. It looks very fancy, but it really doesn't solve the problem that you have. So what you need is people on the ground who find these clinical problems, who might have a generalized understanding of what AI tools can do what, and then you can identify the right tool for the problem that you have. That's what we need, is from within, people that are empowered and have a basic understanding of these AI tools to recognize the problems and what might be able to solve them.
I totally agree. I remember being one of the first few residents doing medical education to a significant level 20 odd years ago. And I think people with the split roles of being clinical, research-based and AI-based are what's going to really help us. And we need to hold the hand of people in organizations who are very nervous and risk averse. We're very risk averse to this. So what stuff's happening nationally? So you mentioned medical device and stuff, so can I just, as a clinician, download an AI app and start using it for patient care? Is that a reasonable, safe use of it? It's a loaded question, isn't it?
Yeah, I felt a little twitch in my
You
soul when I
started
heard
twitching.
that. I was like, oh no. So no,
I was
you
in a
should not
workshop.
be.
I was in a workshop and somebody said, "Oh yeah, put all my
Yeah.
ECGs through ChatGPT."
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
"Really?"
Oh
And
no.
where's the patient information going? Is that a
Yeah.
valid? God, help us when people listening. How do you do this safely, and how do we actually not just be scared and actually start getting some proper pilots at work?
Yeah. So first and foremost, if you're using a medical device AI, the reassuring part is that it tends to have safeguards against, using that patient data to train the model. So generally, medical AI is designed for medical use.
Okay.
So they're not trained on patient data. They've already been trained elsewhere. So you can be assured that there are safeguards on confidentiality. Whereas if you're downloading these apps, so if I'm using ChatGPT or Claude, these open source models, there is a real confidentiality risk. So you have to be very careful in what you put into those tools. And there are ways that, you might think, oh, these are trained on vast quantities of data. Who can sift through it to find the patient data? You can. And, one of the most important things we learn in medical school is to maintain patient confidentiality. So don't do that. Also, you have to recognize that these aren't, like, a lot of the general purpose tools are not designed with healthcare in mind. So they use vast streams of data. This can include medical journals, but it can also include Reddit forums, which I'm sure, is very much of variable quality. So you don't want to base your medical opinion or medical thoughts on a tool that's using Reddit subforums to tell you what to do.
Okay. So, and can you give us an examples of stuff that you've seen that is starting to work, and I know you've talked about there's pilot fatigue. Any ones that you see might be promising for the future, particularly around clinical reasoning and.
So, I'll give an example of a company called Annalise, and I think they developed tools that are excellent, but you can see what I mean by identifying the problem being the crux. So one of the tools that they've developed is a CT head algorithm. And a trust in Yorkshire was struggling with the sheer amount of CT heads that have been requested out of hours. They didn't have enough radiology consultants or registrars on call. So they had to outsource the reporting to, these
overseas.
Exactly.
Locum companies.
Very expensive. So about £60 to £72 per scan. And most of these scans, 80%, in line with the NICE national guidance, come back as normal. And no matter how hard they tried to reduce the demand on these CT requests, they couldn't, because it was, who wants to be the doctor that misses a brain bleed? You might know this patient is probably going to be fine, but you don't want to be the one missing a brain bleed.
And you don't want to be criticised. You don't, it's defensive medicine. It's defensive investigation, isn't it?
Absolutely. So they found a solution. Rather than trying to reduce demand, how can we optimize the process? So they used Annalise's CT head algorithm, or they have a plan to use it. And these algorithms are fantastic in that if it says it doesn't have anything, you can be 99.999% sure that it's not going to have any findings whatsoever. So in a way, you can delay reporting those scans till the next morning, where an in-house radiologist can report them. And then other scans that might have some less urgent findings can be reported less urgently by these locum companies. And therefore, you're still saving money. And anything with an obvious urgent scan, you get reported straight away. And with something like that in place, you could save a lot of money over time. So we're talking in the realm of hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. And you can use that money to then hire more radiologists who can then take up that job in the following morning to report their scans. So I think that's a fantastic use case example. And to highlight the fact that it's not a problem with the AI vendor or the algorithm, Annalise also has an excellent chest X-ray algorithm. It's been implemented in many trusts, but a lot of the doctors say it doesn't really help them with their clinical reasoning very much. Yes, there's still some benefit, But it tends to highlight a lot of things that are probably normal. There's a lot of false positives.
Normal variants, yeah.
So how much of an impact is different?
But if you're being scanned in the middle of the night and and you've got something that's really worrying, now hopefully your radiographers would pick up on it as well as they're processing it and flag it. But ability to make sure that nothing gets missed. I had a resident do a project in Wales, and it was linked to the chest x-rays, but it was more looking at follow-up. So it was actually how many suspicious x-rays prompted proper follow-up and that closing the loop. And when you put a human in, we drop things. Probably, I think they missed 3 cases. That follow-up wasn't properly, the report wasn't action and stuff. And we start using these in the loop, but keeping the human in the loop for the judgment of decisions, the balance, and it has to make patient safety better.
Absolutely. And it boils down to that fundamental difference between attention and intelligence. So with attention, AI tools tend to identify problems that might not exist, but it's very nuanced. And with intelligence, as human beings, we tend to focus on one thing and we might get distracted, not recognizing there's another finding. So when you bring the two together, people that AI tools that are more likely to have false positives and clinicians that might have false negatives, they can compensate for one another. And it goes back to saying that it can create a system that outperforms what each individual can do.
So the benefit of both of them is amplified. That's brilliant. Well, thank you for your time. Before I summarize, I've got one question for you. I'd like to talk about marginal gains. Marginal gains are those small improvements you make or learn in the last year of your own career and learning. What is your one key thing you've learned and developed as an individual?
As an individual, I think it's the main thing I've developed over the last year or so has been persistence. And it goes back to that marginal gain of I was very used to, I think, when I was 18, 19, 20, of thinking I can just work really hard at something and then see the benefits very quickly. And I think what I've learned over the last year is actually I need to do a little bit of effort every day, and then you won't see the benefits till later. But it's been a big learning point.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. My 1% marginal gain from our discussion today has been AI can't replace human side of judgment, which comes with experience, but it can free us up when we're distracted, and it can free up a lot of that admin burden so we can do more what we love, which is speaking to patients, to the team members. Yasmeen, thank you for your time. Thank you for all the amazing workshops you run with us on AI. I think it's such an exciting space. Thank you for being on Why Medics Matter, where we talk about stuff that's really relevant and important to you. So if you've enjoyed this, please click or subscribe and follow us as we will look to bring more interesting topics that resonate with you. Take care. Thank you.